A teacher bullies Blue Ivy Carter, but meeting her mother, Beyoncé, leaves her speechless. Subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching us from. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the Carter household, casting soft, golden hues on the polished hardwood floors. The gentle hum of a familiar tune played in the background, emanating from the record player in the corner of the living room. It was one of Beyoncé's early tracks, one that always brought comfort to 12-year-old Blue Ivy Carter. Despite its soothing melody, Blue felt a knot in her stomach. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, a new school, new classmates, and, most daunting of all, a new teacher. Blue sat at the dining table, absently swirling her spoon in a bowl of cereal. Her younger siblings, Rumi and Sir, giggled over their shared antics, their carefree laughter filling the room. Her mother, Beyoncé, moved gracefully around the kitchen, dressed casually, yet effortlessly elegant. She glanced at Blue, noticing the nervous expression on her face. "Are you ready for today?" Beyoncé asked gently, placing a hand on Blue's shoulder. Blue shrugged. "I guess. It's just, I don't know if I'll fit in. What if they find out who we are?" Beyoncé knelt down so they were eye level. "You're not defined by our fame, baby. You're your own person. Remember, you're smart, kind, and capable. Just be yourself." Blue gave a small nod, though her anxiety lingered. She had always struggled with the weight of her parents' legacy, constantly feeling the pressure to prove herself as more than just Beyoncé and Jay-Z's daughter. The school building loomed ahead as the family car pulled into the drop-off zone. It was an old, sprawling structure with ivy creeping up its red brick walls, exuding a charm that hinted at decades of history. Blue stepped out of the car, clutching her backpack tightly. She took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance, her heart pounding with each step. The corridors were bustling with activity, students chatting, lockers slamming shut, and the faint smell of freshly waxed floors mingling with the scent of paper and ink. Blue felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. She found her way to the front office, where a kind receptionist handed her a schedule and directed her to her homeroom. As she entered the classroom, she was greeted by a cacophony of voices. The room quieted briefly as her classmates glanced her way before returning to their conversations. Blue scanned the rows of desks and chose one near the middle, close enough to avoid seeming aloof but not too close to the teacher's desk to draw unnecessary attention. Minutes later, the door opened, and in walked a woman who exuded authority with every step. Muffled whispers filled the room as students straightened in their seats. This was Mrs. Hudson, the new literature teacher. She was tall and angular, with steel-gray hair tied tightly into a bun, and sharp, discerning eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared to meet her gaze. Her presence alone demanded silence, which fell over the room as she set her briefcase on the desk. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Hudson said, her voice clipped and precise. "My name is Mrs. Hudson. I'll be your literature teacher this year. My expectations are simple: respect, diligence, and excellence. I don't tolerate laziness or mediocrity." Blue felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something unsettling about Mrs. Hudson's demeanor, a coldness that suggested she wouldn't hesitate to crush anyone who fell short of her standards. The first few weeks of school passed uneventfully for most of the students, but not for Blue. From the very beginning, Mrs. Hudson seemed to take a particular interest in her, though not in a positive way. During a class discussion about classic literature, Mrs. Hudson called on Blue to analyze a passage from To Kill a Mockingbird. Blue gave a thoughtful response, but Mrs. Hudson frowned. "Not quite," she said curtly. Your interpretation lacks depth. Perhaps you should spend more time reading and less time daydreaming." A few students stifled giggles. Blue's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she bit her tongue, determined not to show how much the comment stung. As the days turned into weeks, Mrs. Hudson's behavior grew more overtly critical. She frequently singled out Blue for difficult questions, often interrupting her answers to point out flaws. One afternoon, Mrs. Hudson assigned the class an essay on the theme of identity in literature. Blue poured her heart into the assignment, drawing parallels between the characters and her own experiences. She stayed up late perfecting it, hoping to impress the teacher. When Mrs. Hudson returned the graded essays, Blue's heart sank. A large red C was scrawled across the top of her paper. Beneath it, Mrs. Hudson had written, "Your arguments are superficial. I expected more effort." Blue clutched the paper tightly, her frustration bubbling to the surface. She knew her essay was well written. Her parents had always encouraged her to express herself through writing, and she had worked hard on this piece. But Mrs. Hudson's comments made her doubt herself. At home, Blue tried to hide her disappointment, but her mother noticed her subdued demeanor. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Beyoncé asked as they sat together in the living room that evening. Blue hesitated, then shrugged. It was fine. Beyoncé wasn't convinced. She put down the book she was reading and turned to face her daughter. "Blue, talk to me. I can tell something's bothering you." After a moment of silence, Blue relented. "It's just my teacher. No matter what I do, it's never good enough. She's always criticizing me even when I try my best." Beyoncé's expression softened. Sometimes people project their own insecurities onto others. But don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. You're brilliant, Blue. Don't ever forget that. Blue nodded, comforted by her mother's words, but the knot in her stomach remained. She knew she would have to face Mrs. Hudson again tomorrow. The next morning, Blue returned to school, bracing herself for another day of scrutiny. As she entered the classroom, Mrs. Hudson was already there, meticulously organizing her papers. She looked up briefly and gave Blue a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said, her tone laced with something unidentifiable. Was it disdain or merely indifference? "Good morning," Blue replied softly, taking her seat. The lesson began, and Blue focused intently, determined to prove herself. But no matter how hard she tried, Mrs. Hudson always found a way to belittle her efforts. By the end of the day, Blue felt drained and defeated. As she walked home, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot, Blue resolved to find a way to rise above the teacher's unfair treatment. She didn't know how yet, but she knew she couldn't let Mrs. Hudson's words define her. And so, the stage was set for a battle of wills between a young girl struggling to find her place and a teacher determined to keep her in the shadows. The days blurred into weeks, and Blue found herself caught in a cycle of quiet frustration and simmering anxiety. Each morning, as she approached the school building, she felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, a mixture of dread and resolve. She would do her best today, she told herself. She would prove to Mrs. Hudson that she was more than capable, that she wasn't just some spoiled child resting on her parents' fame. But, as the days unfolded, the teacher's antagonism became increasingly blatant. It began with small remarks, seemingly innocuous but laced with subtle barbs. During a discussion about poetry, Mrs. Hudson asked Blue to analyze a stanza. Blue, who had spent hours poring over her textbook the night before, gave what she thought was a thoughtful interpretation. But Mrs. Hudson barely let her finish before interjecting. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice sharp, Your analysis is overly simplistic. Did you even read the text, or are you just repeating something you heard elsewhere?" The classroom went quiet. Blue felt her face flush as she nodded. I read it," she stammered. "Then I suggest you read it again," Mrs. Hudson replied, moving on without another glance. The other students exchanged glances. A few of them smirked, enjoying the spectacle. Blue sank into her seat, wishing she could disappear. At first, the other kids didn't seem particularly interested in Blue. She was just another new face in a sea of students. But Mrs. Hudson's constant criticism began to draw attention. It wasn't long before a few of her classmates started to mimic the teacher's behavior. "Hey, Blue," one boy called out during lunch, "what's it like to have a name that sounds like a crayon?" A few kids laughed and Blue forced a smile, pretending it didn't bother her. But the comments didn't stop there. Another girl, Emily, leaned in conspiratorially during a group project and whispered, "Why does Mrs. Hudson hate you so much? Did you do something to her?" Blue shook her head, focusing on her notes. "I don't know," she murmured. "Maybe she thinks you're too good for us," Emily said with a shrug, her tone half joking, half serious. The words stung more than Blue wanted to admit. She knew that some of the students were starting to see her as an easy target, someone they could mock without consequence. And the worst part was, she couldn't fight back. If she did, she risked drawing even more attention to herself, and to the secret she was trying so hard to keep. At home, Blue tried to put on a brave face. She didn't want her family to worry, especially not her mom, who was already juggling a packed schedule. But Beyoncé wasn't easily fooled. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, she noticed Blue staring blankly at her homework. "Blue, is everything okay?" she asked gently. Blue hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine," Beyoncé said, her tone soft but firm. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Blue sighed, her resolve crumbling. "It's just school," she admitted. "My teacher, Mrs. Hudson, she's always picking on me, and now some of the kids are too. I don't know why. I didn't do anything." Beyoncé's expression darkened, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm sorry you're going through this, baby. Sometimes people project their own insecurities onto others, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. You're stronger than you think." Blue nodded, grateful for her mom's reassurance, but the knot in her stomach remained. She wasn't sure how much longer she could endure the daily humiliation. The turning point came during an essay assignment. Mrs. Hudson had asked the class to write about a defining moment in their lives. Blue spent hours working on her essay, pouring her heart into the story of a summer trip to New Orleans with her family. She wrote about the vibrant culture, the music that seemed to pulse through the streets, and how the experience had deepened her appreciation for her roots. When Mrs. Hudson returned the graded essays, Blue's heart sank. A large red C was scrawled across the top of her paper, accompanied by the comment, "Your writing lacks depth. I expected more effort." Blue stared at the paper in disbelief. She had worked so hard on that essay, and she knew it was one of her best pieces. But Mrs. Hudson's words cut deep, planting seeds of doubt. "Looks like someone's not the teacher's favorite," a boy named Jake muttered as he walked past her desk, smirking. Blue clenched her fists, fighting back tears. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. The final straw came during a group presentation. Blue's team had spent weeks preparing a skit based on a scene from Romeo and Juliet. They had rehearsed tirelessly, and Blue had even taken on the role of Juliet, despite her nerves. When the performance ended, the class applauded, But Mrs. Hudson's face remained impassive. "Interest in interpretation," she said coolly. "But your delivery was unconvincing, Miss Carter. Perhaps acting isn't your forte." The words echoed in Blue's mind, louder than the scattered applause. As she sat back down, she felt the weight of the stares around her, the whispers that followed. "She's so bad," someone muttered. "Guess being famous doesn't make you good at everything," another voice said. Blue felt the tears welling up, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them see her break. That evening, Blue sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the essay Mrs. Hudson had returned. The red C seemed to mock her, a symbol of her growing frustration and self-doubt. She thought about her mom's words, about being strong, but it was hard to feel strong when everything seemed stacked against her. She reached for her phone and opened a playlist her mom had made for her, a collection of songs meant to inspire and uplift. As the familiar melody of Halo filled the room, Blue closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that she wasn't alone. But as the song ended, the knot in her stomach returned. Tomorrow, she would have to face Mrs. Hudson again. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending everything was okay. Blue woke up the next morning with a heavy heart, the events of the previous day playing on a loop in her mind. She had tried to shake off Mrs. Hudson's latest jab and the smirks from her classmates, but their words clung to her like a stubborn shadow. As she trudged into the kitchen for breakfast, her mother greeted her with a warm smile, her presence as radiant as ever. "Good morning, sweetheart," Beyoncé said, placing a plate of eggs and toast on the table. "Morning," Blue mumbled, sliding into her chair. Her mother studied her for a moment but decided not to press. She knew Blue needed time to process her feelings and come to her when she was ready. The school hallways felt especially hostile that morning. Blue noticed the subtle glances from her classmates and the whispered conversations that seemed to stop whenever she walked by. She tried to ignore them, keeping her head down and focusing on the scuffed linoleum floor. As she slid into her seat for the first class, she overheard a snippet of a conversation from the desk behind her. "Did you hear? I think she's famous or something." "Her parents, maybe? She doesn't act like it, though." Blue froze. Her grip tightened on the strap of her backpack, her breath quickening. Someone knew. But how? She had been so careful to keep her family's identity a secret. Panic bubbled up inside her as she struggled to concentrate on the lesson. By lunchtime, the whispers had grown louder. As Blue carried her tray to an empty table, a group of girls nearby erupted into giggles. "Hey, Blue," one of them called out, smirking. "So, when's your next big concert? Or are you too busy living in your mom's shadow?" The blood drained from Blue's face. She set her tray down carefully, her hands trembling. She didn't need to ask how they knew. It was clear that her secret had been uncovered, and the students were relishing the opportunity to use it against her. The final blow came during literature class. Mrs. Hudson stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, as she surveyed the students. Her eyes landed on Blue, and her lips curled into a thin smile. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge, "perhaps you can enlighten the class. With your background, I'm sure you have some profound insights to share." Blue's stomach churned. She could feel the weight of everyone's stares, their curiosity and judgment pressing down on her. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know." Mrs. Hudson's smile widened. "A pity," she said. "I had higher expectations for someone with your upbringing." The class erupted into laughter, and Blue's cheeks burned with humiliation. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never come back. That evening, Blue couldn't hold it in any longer. As she sat on the couch with her mother, tears streaming down her face, she poured out everything, the relentless criticism from Mrs. Hudson, the cruel comments from her classmates, and the revelation of her secret. "They all know, Mom," she sobbed, "and now they won't leave me alone. Mrs. Hudson hates me, and the kids, they think I'm some spoiled brat who doesn't belong here." Beyoncé wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. "Oh, Blue," she said softly, stroking her hair. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. But you're not alone, okay? We'll figure this out together." "But how?" Blue asked, her voice trembling. "They've already made up their minds about me." Beyoncé pulled back slightly, looking her daughter in the eyes. "You can't control what they think," she said, "but you can control how you respond. And I know you have the strength to rise above this." Blue nodded, her mother's words giving her a glimmer of hope. But deep down, she still felt the weight of the challenges ahead. The next day, Blue returned to school with a renewed sense of determination. She avoided the gossip and the stares as best she could, focusing on her classes and trying to stay under the radar. But it was clear that the rumors weren't going away anytime soon. In the cafeteria, a group of students had gathered around a phone, laughing and pointing. Blue's heart sank as she realized they were looking at a picture of her with her parents, one that had been circulating online. Someone must have found it and shared it with the entire school. "Looks like little Miss Carter has some famous connections," one boy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Too bad that doesn't make her any smarter." Blue clenched her fists, willing herself not to react. She knew that giving them a response would only fuel their taunts. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hudson continued to escalate her attacks. During a class discussion about privilege, she made a pointed comment that left no doubt about whom it was directed at. "Some people are born with every advantage," she said, her gaze fixed on Blue, "but that doesn't mean they know how to use them." Blue felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to let the tears fall. Instead, she channeled her frustration into her work, determined to prove Mrs. Hudson wrong. At home, Blue and her mother began working on a plan. Beyoncé suggested that Blue use the upcoming school essay contest as an opportunity to share her story and set the record straight. It was a chance to show her classmates and Mrs. Hudson who she truly was. "I'll help you if you want," Beyoncé said, "but this is your story, Blue. It has to come from your heart." Blue nodded, her resolve strengthening. She wasn't going to let the whispers and judgment define her. This was her chance to reclaim her voice and show everyone that she was more than just a famous last name. The chapter ends with Blue sitting at her desk, pen in hand, as she begins to write. The words come slowly at first, but soon they flow freely, each one a step toward reclaiming her identity. She doesn't know how her essay will be received, but for the first time in weeks, she feels a spark of hope. Blue sat at her desk late into the evening, the faint glow of her lamp casting a soft light over her notebook. The essay she was drafting for the school contest was sprawled out before her, a mixture of scratched-out lines and hastily written thoughts. She had started over at least 5 times, each version feeling either too forced or not authentic enough. The words on the page seemed hollow compared to the emotions swirling inside her. Her mother's advice echoed in her mind. "This is your story. It has to come from your heart." But how could she write about something so personal when her heart felt weighed down by the constant judgment and scrutiny she faced? Blue sighed and closed her notebook, resting her head on the desk. She felt defeated. Downstairs, Beyoncé was tidying up the living room when she heard the faint sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Moments later, Blue appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. "Can't sleep?" Beyoncé asked, setting down a book she had been reading. Blue shook her head and flopped onto the couch beside her mother. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Beyoncé waited patiently, sensing that her daughter needed time to find the words. Finally, Blue broke the silence. "I don't know what to write," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I try, it feels wrong, like I'm trying to prove something instead of just telling the truth." Beyoncé nodded thoughtfully. "What truth do you want to tell?" she asked. Blue hesitated. "I want people to understand me. Not as your daughter or Dad's daughter, but as me. But I don't even know who that is sometimes." Beyoncé reached out and took her daughter's hand. "Blue, it's okay to feel that way. Finding yourself is a journey, and you're still at the beginning. But you've already taken the first step by wanting to be seen for who you are. That's bravery, my love." Blue looked up at her mother, tears welling in her eyes. "But what if they never see me that way? What if they just see my name and make assumptions?" "Then you show them who you are," Beyoncé said firmly, not with anger or defensiveness, but with honesty. "Your story is yours to tell, and no one can take that from you." Blue nodded, her mother's words giving her a renewed sense of purpose. She wiped her eyes and leaned against Beyoncé's shoulder, feeling a small but growing flicker of hope. The next morning, Blue woke up with a clearer head. She returned to her desk and reopened her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. This time, the words came more easily. She wrote about her love of books and how they had always been her escape. She wrote about the pressure she felt to live up to her parents' legacy and the constant struggle to define herself outside of their shadow. She wrote about her desire to be understood, not as a celebrity's child, but as a person with her own dreams and aspirations. By the time she finished, the sun was high in the sky, and her hand ached from writing. But for the first time, she felt proud of what she had created. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. When Blue shared the essay with Beyoncé later that day, her mother read it silently, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at Blue with tears in her eyes. "This is beautiful," Beyoncé said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's honest and raw, and it shows so much of who you are. I'm so proud of you." Blue felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of confidence. "Do you think it's enough to win?" she asked. "Winning doesn't matter," Beyoncé said gently. "What matters is that you're telling your story. That's the victory." Over the next few days, Beyoncé helped Blue polish her essay. They worked late into the evenings, sitting together at the dining table with mugs of tea and stacks of paper. Beyoncé offered suggestions but never imposed her ideas, always encouraging Blue to stay true to her voice. During one of their late-night sessions, Beyoncé shared a story from her own past. She told Blue about a time when she had faced criticism early in her career and how she had learned to channel her pain into her music. "People will always have something to say," Beyoncé said, "but you can't let their words define you. You take that pain and you turn it into something beautiful. That's what you've done with this essay." Blue listened intently, feeling a newfound connection to her mother. For so long, she had seen Beyoncé as a larger-than-life figure, someone untouchable and perfect. But in that moment, she saw her as a person, someone who had faced struggles of her own and come out stronger. The day of the essay contest approached, and Blue felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She rehearsed her reading in front of her family, her voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each attempt. Beyoncé and Jay-Z sat together on the couch, their faces glowing with pride as they listened. "You've got this, baby girl," Jay-Z said, giving her a thumbs up. "They're not ready for what you're about to bring." Blue laughed, her father's confidence contagious. For the first time, she began to believe that she could do this, not just for herself, but to show everyone who she truly was. On the morning of the contest, Blue stood in front of the bathroom mirror, smoothing down her hair and practicing her opening lines. She felt a surge of nerves as she imagined standing in front of the entire school, but she pushed the fear aside. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As she walked into the school auditorium, clutching her essay in trembling hands, she spotted her mother sitting in the audience. Beyoncé gave her a reassuring smile and mouthed, "You've got this." Blue took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her momentarily. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Mrs. Hudson, who sat near the back with her arms crossed. The teacher's expression was unreadable, but Blue didn't let it deter her. She unfolded her essay and began to read, her voice steady and clear. The words flowed from her lips, each one carrying a piece of her heart. She spoke about her struggles, her dreams, and her determination to define herself on her own terms. When she finished, the auditorium was silent for a moment before erupting into applause. Blue felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her as she stepped off the stage. She had done it. She had told her story. As she walked back to her seat, Beyoncé pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You were incredible." Blue smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, she felt like she had truly been seen, not as Beyoncé's daughter, but as herself. The applause from the auditorium still echoed in Blue's ears as she stepped off the stage. Her heart pounded, a mixture of adrenaline and relief washing over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt heard, seen, not as someone living in the shadow of fame, but as a girl with her own voice. She glanced at her mother in the audience, who was smiling with pride, her eyes glistening. Blue returned the smile, her chest swelling with a mixture of gratitude and hope. But not everyone in the room shared that sentiment. Near the back of the auditorium, Mrs. Hudson sat stiffly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable, but Blue couldn't shake the feeling of disapproval radiating from her teacher's rigid posture. For a moment, their eyes met, and a chill ran down Blue's spine. Mrs. Hudson's lips pressed into a thin line, and she quickly looked away. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations and curious questions from classmates. Some students who had once ignored her now approached her with hesitant smiles and words of praise. Others, like Jake and Emily, kept their distance, their glances filled with a mix of surprise and resentment. Blue navigated the attention as gracefully as she could, but the memory of Mrs. Hudson's cold stare lingered in her mind. The following day, Blue returned to school feeling lighter. The weight she had been carrying for weeks seemed to have lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of confidence. She walked into her literature class with her head held high, ready to face whatever came her way. Mrs. Hudson was already in the classroom, her sharp gaze scanning the students as they filed in. When Blue entered, the teacher's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but she said nothing. Blue took her seat and pulled out her notebook, determined not to let Mrs. Hudson's silent judgment rattle her. As the class began, Mrs. Hudson launched into a lecture about the importance of critical thinking in literature. Her tone was as stern as ever, but there was an edge to her words that felt almost personal. True insight requires more than surface-level observations, she said, her eyes briefly flicking to Blue. It requires depth, nuance, and an ability to challenge preconceived notions. Blue clenched her pen tightly, resisting the urge to speak up. She knew Mrs. Hudson's comment was directed at her, but she also knew better than to take the bait. The lesson continued, but the tension between Blue and Mrs. Hudson was palpable. Each time Blue raised her hand to contribute, Mrs. Hudson either ignored her or dismissed her answers with thinly veiled disdain. The other students began to notice, their whispers and sidelong glances adding to the charged atmosphere. By the time lunch rolled around, Blue's initial confidence had been replaced by frustration. She sat alone at her usual table, poking at her food and replaying Mrs. Hudson's comments in her mind. She couldn't understand why the teacher seemed so determined to undermine her, even after her heartfelt essay had moved so many people. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Blue looked up to see a girl named Harper sitting down across from her. Harper was quiet and studious, someone who usually kept to herself, but her kind smile put Blue at ease. "I just wanted to say, your essay was amazing," Harper said, her voice soft but sincere. "It really made me think about how hard it must be to grow up in the spotlight." Blue felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, managing a small smile. "That means a lot." Harper hesitated before speaking again. "I've noticed how Mrs. Hudson treats you," she said cautiously. "It's not fair. And it's not just you. She's been like that with other students, too, especially ones she thinks don't fit her idea worthy." Blue's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Harper glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Last year, there was a boy in her class, Michael. He was brilliant, but his family didn't have a lot of money. Mrs. Hudson used to make comments about how he probably didn't have the resources to succeed. He ended up transferring schools because of her." Blue felt a surge of anger. Mrs. Hudson's behavior wasn't just about her, it was a pattern. And now that she knew the truth, Blue couldn't stay silent. That afternoon, Blue approached the principal's office with a pounding heart. She hesitated outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Part of her wanted to turn around and forget the whole thing, but Harper's words echoed in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she knocked and stepped inside. The principal, Mr. Whitaker, looked up from his desk with a welcoming smile. "Blue, what can I do for you?" Blue hesitated for a moment, then launched into an explanation of Mrs. Hudson's behavior. She spoke about the unfair criticism, the targeted comments, and the way the teacher seemed to single her out. She also mentioned what Harper had told her about Michael. Mr. Whitaker listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. When Blue finished, he leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he said. "I take these concerns very seriously, and I'll be looking into the matter. In the meantime, please let me know if anything else happens." Blue nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. She had taken a step toward addressing the problem, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The following week, Mr. Whitaker called Mrs. Hudson into his office for a meeting. Blue didn't know the details of their conversation, but she noticed a subtle shift in Mrs. Hudson's demeanor. The teacher still maintained her stern exterior, but the overt hostility seemed to have lessened. One afternoon, as the class worked silently on an assignment, Mrs. Hudson approached Blue's desk. Blue tensed, expecting another sharp remark, but to her surprise, the teacher's tone was softer than usual. "Your essay showed promise," Mrs. Hudson said quietly. "I may not agree with everything you wrote, but it's clear you have potential." Blue blinked, unsure how to respond. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it felt like the closest thing to one she would get. "Thank you," she said cautiously. Mrs. Hudson nodded and walked away, leaving Blue to process the unexpected exchange. While she didn't fully trust the change in Mrs. Hudson's attitude, she felt a sense of vindication. She had stood up for herself, and it had made a difference. As the weeks passed, Blue noticed other changes as well. Her classmates began to treat her with more respect, their curiosity about her family giving way to genuine admiration for her courage and determination. Harper became a close friend, and together they started a campaign to promote kindness and inclusivity at the school. Blue's journey wasn't over, but she felt stronger and more confident than ever. She had faced adversity head-on and come out the other side with a clearer sense of who she was. And for the first time, she felt proud to be Blue Ivy Carter, not just a name, but a person with her own voice and story. The final weeks of the semester brought a sense of clarity to Blue's world that she hadn't thought possible just months before. The air in the school felt different now, lighter, freer. The whispers in the hallways had quieted, and the tension that once greeted her every morning had begun to dissipate. Blue walked confidently into her literature classroom, her steps steady and assured. The desks were arranged in their usual grid, sunlight streaming through the large windows. Mrs. Hudson was at her desk, her expression neutral as she sorted through a stack of papers. Blue noticed that the teacher had been less confrontational lately, her sharp remarks replaced with a more measured tone. It wasn't exactly warmth, but it was a step away from the cold disdain that had defined their relationship before. Blue took her seat near the middle of the room, greeting Harper with a smile as she settled in beside her. Harper had become one of her closest allies, their shared understanding of Mrs. Hudson's behavior forging a bond that went deeper than mere friendship. The two of them had spent countless afternoons brainstorming ways to make their school a more inclusive and supportive environment. Today's lesson was about reflective writing. Fitting, Blue thought, given everything she had experienced. Mrs. Hudson stood at the front of the room, her posture as impeccable as ever, but there was a noticeable softness in her voice as she addressed the class. "Reflection," she began, "is not merely about looking back. It's about understanding how our experiences shape us and how we can use that understanding to grow. For your final assignment, I want you to write about a moment that changed your perspective, something that challenged you and made you rethink the world around you." Blue's heart raced as she listened. This was an opportunity to capture everything she had learned, to put into words the transformation she had undergone. She glanced at Harper, who gave her an encouraging nod. That evening, Blue sat at her desk, the same notebook open before her. The blank page stared back at her, but this time it didn't intimidate her. She picked up her pen and began to write, the words flowing easily. She wrote about the challenges of being seen only as her parents' daughter, about the weight of expectations and the sting of judgment. She wrote about Mrs. Hudson's criticism and how it had pushed her to find her own voice. And she wrote about the essay contest, how it had been a turning point, a moment where she had reclaimed her narrative and shown the world who she truly was. But most importantly, she wrote about growth, about how the hardships she had faced had made her stronger, more resilient, about how she had learned to embrace her identity and stand up for herself and others. By the time she finished, her hand ached, but her heart felt full. She read over her words, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. This wasn't just an assignment, it was a testament to her journey. The next day, Blue handed in her essay, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew that Mrs. Hudson's response would be a critical moment, but she also knew that her worth wasn't defined by one person's opinion. She had written from her heart, and that was enough. As the days passed, Blue noticed subtle changes in Mrs. Hudson's demeanor. The teacher seemed more thoughtful in her interactions, her words less biting and more constructive. It was as if Blue's courage had sparked a change, however small, in her as well. When Mrs. Hudson returned the essays, Blue hesitated before turning hers over to see the grade. She took a deep breath and flipped the paper. There, in neat red ink, was an A. Below it, Mrs. Hudson had written a brief note. "Your growth is evident. Keep using your voice. It's powerful." Blue's eyes widened in surprise. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a recognition of the effort she had put in and the person she was becoming. She felt a surge of validation, not from the grade itself, but from the journey it represented. The school year ended with a celebration in the gymnasium. Students and teachers gathered for an awards ceremony, where achievements in academics, arts, and leadership were recognized. Blue sat with Harper and a few other friends, enjoying the festive atmosphere. To her astonishment, her name was called during the leadership awards. Blue rose from her seat, her heart pounding as she walked to the stage. The principal handed her a certificate, smiling warmly. "Blue Ivy Carter has shown remarkable resilience and leadership this year," he said. "Her courage and determination have made a lasting impact on our school community." The audience erupted into applause, and Blue felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. She glanced at her mother in the crowd, who was clapping enthusiastically, her face beaming with pride. Blue smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known she needed. The summer that followed was a time of reflection and renewal. Blue spent her days reading, writing, and exploring her passions. She worked with Harper to develop a peer support program at their school, designed to help students facing challenges similar to the ones they had experienced. The program, called Voices Together, quickly gained momentum, and Blue found herself thriving in her role as a mentor and advocate. One afternoon, as she and her mother sat together in the garden, Beyoncé asked, "How do you feel about everything now?" Blue thought for a moment, gazing at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. "I feel free," she said, "like I finally know who I am, and I'm okay with it." Beyoncé smiled, her eyes filled with love. "You've always known who you are, Blue. You just needed to see it for yourself." As the next school year began, Blue walked through the familiar hallways with a sense of purpose. She was no longer the uncertain girl who had once felt invisible and overshadowed. She was Blue Ivy Carter, a writer, a leader, a person with her own story to tell. And as she entered her first class of the year, she knew that this was only the beginning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and thought-provoking tales. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. It might just spark a conversation. And while you're here, check out our other videos. You'll find plenty more stories to explore. See you in the next one.